a very light slide deck here that I'm going to walk through. It's, I think, 6 slides of actual content. So I will walk through them, but I'm hoping that anything that folks want more detail on, that they'll ask me to stop and drill down a little more, or if there's any questions that you guys can jump in. I'm not sure if that's through the chat or through unmuting, whatever makes sense to you guys is fine with me. I'm going to focus on, let me share my screen here. I'm going to focus really on the National Science Foundation, which is where I work. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? All right, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Anthony. Really the focus here is going to be less on process and more on philosophy. My goal is for those of you who are very new to this idea of the Small Business Innovation Research Program to get some sense about whether it might be something you want to explore further. And I'm going to talk less about, you know, the ins and outs of how to apply, but we have lots of information available for those aspects on our website. We have weekly webinars with a lot of ways to get more information. But I'll try to cover the high points here if possible. One thing I'll say before I start, I'm going to focus on the NSF, but for those of you who are brand new, the SBIR program exists across the federal government. It's mandated across any agency with some significant amount of R&D, external R&D funding, like money that they send out to do R&D. And so we are only about 7% of the overall opportunity in the federal government. The SBIR program is about a $4 billion program where thousands of companies each year get funding through grants and contracts to develop their new high technology, high risk products and services. So I'm going to focus on NSF, and I have a much less understanding of the other agencies, but I'm happy to try to answer questions about SBIR broadly if that's helpful. So just to give you some high points about our program, I am part of the National Science Foundation. Most of what we do here at the NSF is basic research funding, and that is people trying to learn new things about the universe, biologists, geologists, astronomers, physicists, chemists, mostly at universities, and NSF gives them research money so they can explore the world and hopefully publish that information and move kind of scientific frontier forward. That's about an $8.5 billion effort. That's our budget. Our program is a piece of that, obviously. Our funding each year is around $230 million last year through the SBIR program. And out of that $230 million, about 97% of it goes back out of the door to small businesses across the country. And those are in the form of grants and cooperative agreements. Grants and cooperative agreements meaning we're going to give you money to do R&D, to work on the development of a new market relevant product or service. So these are not loans, you're not paying them back. They're non-dilutive. We don't take an equity stake in your organization. It's great early funding if you're able to secure it. Our program is centralized, and when I say that, what I mean is that this $230 million, the decisions on how to allocate that through different applicant companies is made by a relatively small group of people that all work together in the same part of the same building. Before COVID, at least. Now we're in our own virtual offices around the DC metro area. But all of us are really dedicated to this kind of program, and specifically, we're dedicated to the kind of support of startups. That's really our focus here at the NSF. I'll talk about that shortly. So as Karen mentioned, I have a kind of a background where I was trained in a scientific discipline, and I then spent time as a founder of a startup. That's a very common background for our team. Our team tends to have that dual background where we have technical expertise in our fields of research, whatever kind of field of science we happen to be funding in. And then all of us have been hired from the private sector. So I think there's 14 program directors currently in NSF, and I think 12 of them came directly from the private sector. So our experience really is mostly in the private sector and mostly not in the government. But we're trying to kind of infuse that spirit in our program. So this is a phased process. If you're applying for funding, you're going to apply for a smaller amount first and then a larger amount later. The first phase of funding is $275,000. The second phase starts at $1 million and can grow to about $1.5 million or more in some cases. NSF, this is not the case for every agency that does SBIR, but NSF is really focused on funding early stage startups. Here's some data on the companies that we fund with this phase one, with the first phase of funding, and the stats on them. As you can see, they're mostly small, mostly new, and most of them actually are first-time government funding applicants, which I think no other government program can say that I know of, where most of the companies they fund are actually doing it for the first time. So that's something that I think if you're new to the government, I feel like it is tricky. It is difficult to apply. I feel like we've done a pretty good job to make it as accessible to newcomers as possible. And so we definitely are proud to be the first stop of many companies on their, whether it be a government funding path to other agencies, or whether it be to retain private funding from the, to follow on our funding to get funding from investors or corporate partners, for example. The program here is really focused on startups because we feel like startups are where we can get the biggest impact. And so when we fund a company, we give them funding to develop their new product or service. The goal we have in mind is that they're going to make the product or service work, and that they're going to then take the difficult and tricky commercial path to actually scalably develop the product or service and get it into the hands of customers to solve a problem. And that's the impact we're looking to have. In our experience, we're trying to fund these companies. We're using your taxpayer money to do that. And the impact that we're looking to get on the taxpayer is that you're going to become a big, successful commercial business. You're going to make money, pay taxes, create jobs, and solve some problem for your customers, which will hopefully have a positive benefit on society. So despite the fact that we support startups, I would like to point out that we have I think a pretty good record of really seeding some very, very exciting, very commercially successful companies. I have a few headlines here. This is just from the last, a little bit less than the last 6 months in our portfolio. These are some funding, some news and headlines around some of the companies we funded. Some of them a year ago, some of them 10 years ago. This is typically the path that our most successful companies take. They'll get funding from NSF early on. They may or may not get funding from other government entities, and then they'll usually raise significant funding from the private sector. And generally, the way that their technology gets into the market is by being acquired. It's not necessary to do that, but that's usually there's an existing player in your market where once the technology works, they have more ability and scale to get that technology out broadly than your company does, and that's why companies get acquired, right? So our companies typically get about $200 million from us in any given year, and then they typically raise $2 to $4 billion of follow-on private capital based on our funding. So that's a great return on investment for our companies. The other thing to point out here, and I won't talk about this in too much detail, but if you just look at these headlines, you will notice a very broad, different set of technologies. We got semiconductors, robotics, cybersecurity, synthetic biology. We got new hardware, new materials technologies, agricultural technologies, and artificial intelligence, right? And so our program funds across the technological spectrum. There's really no technology with both a scientific or research frontier and with some sense of commercial potential or commercial impact that could happen that we don't support. And so that would be one thing I would encourage you not to worry about too much is topics. For those of you who are not sure if you're a good fit, here's things that we look for in companies that we want to fund. We are going to give you money only to do one thing, which is research and development. Research and development is usually something that a small business is only going to do if they've got a product that doesn't work yet, right? That's the idea. And so if you've got something that is proven and you just need money to scale it or to go out and engage customers and do marketing and sales, it's actually not something we're able to support. We're really looking to fund you when you think your product may not end up working at all. We're looking for those high technical risks. And we're looking for the technical risks that you are going to confront requiring a significant amount of money, right? This is $1 million or $2 million. That's a significant set of R&D that you can do with that. So that there's got to be a pretty significant hurdle in front of your technology to be a good fit for us. We're hoping that once that technology is proven out into a reliable product or service, that it has some new innovative approach that is going to create a significant competitive advantage for your firm, like it's 10x better than anything else that's out there. That's obviously really critical for your company to succeed commercially, because all of you have bigger, more established competitors, basically without exception. So we're looking for that risk, and we're looking for the innovation that's going to create a drawbridge that you can pull up behind you once you've been able to make the product work. And then we're looking for you, maybe most importantly, to be the company that is going to do the research, because the research is what gets you to the commercialization, right? And there's a lot of folks out there, and myself included, who love doing research. It's interesting to us, it's fun, and that's great, but that's not the goal here. That's a means to an end for our program. If your goal is to do research and then kind of stop when the research is done, you're not a good fit for us, because the only impacts that we have is if somebody takes the results of that research and takes the hard multi-year journey required to actually to get a product into the hands of customers and to solve their problem. And so your company needs to be structured, and your staff need to have that at in their heart. That's what they get up every day thinking, is I want to get up and solve this problem that I've seen in the market, not I want to get up and play with my technology. And one of the things that really we look for in even early stage companies is that we're looking for some sense of initial market engagement. One of the best ways that we can reduce the risk on the market side, and one of the best ways that we can see that your team is really focused on really doing the commercial work that is needed, is that you're starting to engage with customers and stakeholders in your market. And so the ICorps program, which I'm not sure if it's been discussed with this audience, is a great way to do that, but there's other ways to do it. But we believe that even before you start, take one step into the lab to do any research on your technology, you should start talking to customers, potential customers. There's no time that's too early to start having those conversations. And that's a huge differentiator between successful phase 1 proposals and unsuccessful ones. Dan is nodding. He's been a reviewer, and he's seen that firsthand, so he can definitely hopefully validate that comment. Here's some things not to worry about that we see a lot of people stressing. And again, this is very specific to NSF. Other agencies, you may need to worry about one or all of these things, I suspect. But within NSF, we really don't put a lot of our decision-making stock into some of these aspects. So number one, do I fit a technical topic or an interest for NSF? We don't have interests or really any focus on any specific topic. We use topics to tell you where to go and who to talk to, but we don't use them to keep you from applying or getting funded. Similarly, is my project of interest to NSF? As I mentioned, our entire budget is essentially used to process applications for funding and then to send as much money as possible out the door. We don't have any money to buy your product. We don't buy your product. So the fact that it's of interest to us is not relevant, because the important people are the people who are actually going to buy a product and whose problems you can solve. And they're not within NSF. They might be in the government, but most commonly, most of the customers in the world are outside the government. So most of the time, the important people to have interest in your product are people in the private sector. We would encourage you not to worry about the budget too much. We don't use the budget typically to make funding decisions. It is part of the proposal, but it's a secondary part. We don't care if you've never submitted a grant proposal before. In fact, the success rate for our program is higher for people who've never submitted before than for those who have, slightly higher. What if I make some minor administrative error? There are a few errors you can make, and so we want you to be careful. There are a few errors you can make that will get your proposal kicked out of our process, but that is only about 2 to 3% of our proposals each year. So unless you're unlucky or very sloppy, you shouldn't worry too much about minor administrative issues. We let people fix a lot of issues that we find with proposals when they come in. Finally, we are the National Science Foundation, but I think that we are fairly flexible on the nature of the research team. This is a research and development effort. We do need to see that the team has the research background, the background of kind of technical competency and expertise to conduct the work you're trying to do. It's high-risk research. It's difficult to carry out. So we do need to see that the team has either in the company or with partners that they have the kind of technical chops needed to make it potentially successful. But that doesn't mean that the PI has to have any specific academic connection, any specific degree, any specific track record. In fact, we track our companies, and one of the data points we recently identified was that We have in the last few years had 35 of our companies reach a valuation of $250 million or more. And so each of those 35 companies is more valuable than our entire budget, which is great to see. One thing we notice about those 35 is that 28 of them are led entirely by first-time entrepreneurs, which is actually an incredible data point. And some of those people have PhDs, and a lot of them don't. So there's no necessarily one way to do this well. But we do need to see that the collective team has relevant technical expertise. If you're interested in learning more, the next step is what we call a project pitch. It is a 3-pager, 2 or 3 pagers submitted through a web form on our website. seedfund.nsf.gov is our website for any information, including submitting this pitch. This project pitch is submitted anytime. It's going to go to the program director who leads the topic that you think that you sense is the best fit, although we may move it around if we think that the fit is somewhere else. We typically respond within no more than 4 weeks, but the average is more like a week or 2. And this is really not a review of the merit of your proposal. It's a review of the appropriateness of what you're doing. So is this a good fit for our program? But we're not looking deeply at the technology or the commercial aspects yet. But I think this is a great way for you to get a sense about whether you're in the ballpark for our program. And more importantly, the person who responds is the person who is almost always going to review your phase 1 proposal. So now you know who to talk to and to ask questions to. And they're going to send typically a fair amount of feedback if you're invited to submit a full proposal. So yeah, if the pitch is a good fit, you'll be invited to submit a full proposal. The full proposal is more detailed, and there's more government bureaucracy. The next time you could submit a proposal would be the end of June. You can submit any time, but the train leaves the station at the end of June, and then again in October. And there's lots of information on our website about the full proposal as well, but I'm not going to go into that too much here today. That's all my slides. I'm going to show you all a couple of points of contacts. This is our general email. I can put my own email into the chat here, our Twitter handle, and our website. And with that, I will ask for questions.
And we do have one in the chat. And the question says, does it matter if partners' team members are at universities in Canada and the UK?
This is a great question. I didn't talk about eligibility, but this does touch on the eligibility for the program. So let me answer the question and talk about eligibility more broadly. Our funding, the funding that we provide through our award, typically has to be spent in the United States. And so you could have partners overseas. They typically couldn't pay them through our award, but you could obviously work with them through other funds. The other eligibility things, I didn't mention, but you do have to be a small business to apply for this. Hopefully is that part hopefully is clear from the title of the program. The definition of small business is there's a couple of things you need to meet. You have to be for profit. You have to be fewer than 500 employees, which is, as I mentioned with our program, almost never a problem. You have to be organized in the US, and you have to be controlled and owned majority by US citizens or US permanent residents. So that ownership and control by US persons is the critical piece really for most people. And so you could be a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC, or maybe some other form, but you have to be for profit and small. The other thing I will say about foreign collaborators is if you do have part of the work that you want to have somebody who's not in the US do, each of our awards allows you to request a fee, and the fee is for phase 1 it's 7%. So you would theoretically get an award of about $275,000, and you could ask for some chunk of that, 17,000 of that as a fee. The fee is something that you can do anything you would like with. So if you want to pay somebody overseas, you could theoretically use that 7% to do so.
Okay, there have been a couple other questions in chat, and I will say too that you can also take yourselves off of mute now if you have questions. But one question is, besides letters of support from prospective industry customers, what amount of market research do we have to do for a phase 1?
So, I think it's good to do, there's no required level of market research, but the more is typically better. Our pool of applicants is stronger every year, and honestly, companies, 5 years ago, a company that hadn't started talking to customers could get awarded. It's probably really hard for that to happen now, I suspect. I want to stress, the term market research is usually used to refer to something that I think is a little bit, it's not quite exactly what we're looking for you to do before phase one. Market research usually is a top down. It starts with a total amount of a certain industry segment, and it kind of talks about compounding growth rates and things like that. That's all fine, but that's not quite what we're looking for you to do. We're looking really for identifying a specific customer archetype, engaging those customers. So it's a bottom up engaged, hand to hand, face to face engagement of the market rather than a report that is going to be top down. So as far as what we hope folks to do, we hope folks have thought about theoretically a hypothesis for what customer has what problem that your technology could solve if it's built out, and that you've gone and tried to find some people who meet that archetype and started to figure out if you can validate the needs that they have at least. And again, this is all stolen from ICorps and stolen from, which is in turn stolen from the Lean Launchpad or customer discovery a la Steve Blank. And so if you follow the kind of best practices of those programs, I think you're very well aligned to be successful in phase one. So I would encourage folks to, those best practices we basically stole because we thought they were super relevant to our awards. ICorps was created by NSF to solve a problem in the SBIR program. And so I would encourage folks, if they're not quite sure what we mean by market research, to really find someone, read Steve Blank's book, read Alex Osterwalder's book, read The Lean Startup, go online. There's plenty of free resources about how to do customer discovery and kind of learn that discipline, because that's the discipline that we think is the way to attack these types of projects.
Another question, if you have done preliminary lab work, does that disqualify you?
No, not at all. We have a pretty wide range of projects, from things that are just complete ideas with zero tangible work done that we'll fund, and some things you may already have a prototype. The critical thing to decide if you're a good fit is that there remain existential technical risks to the technology, right? That even if you've gone into the lab and started work, that you can point to one or more things that you haven't figured out yet that, if they don't get figured out correctly, are going to doom your products from the point of view of the commercial opportunity, and that are not things that you're sure you can pull off, right? Things that have some risk, and not just risk in the sense that I need to get money to do this, but risk in the sense that even if I have enough money to try this, it might not work, right? And so we're looking, if you have that existing risk that still faces your products, you're probably a good fit for us, whether or not you've done some other research.
Next question. I am familiar with other SBIR programs and they publish topics. I apologize if I missed it in your talk, but can you propose unsolicited topics and be evaluated for funding, or are they specific topics posed throughout the year like DoD?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, we do have our website where there's a lot of topics, but they're all unsolicited, right? That's what we're looking for. We don't solicit topics at NSF because the more you get a sense we want to see one thing versus another, the more tempted you're going to be to do what we want to do rather than what you want to do. And we want to support what you want to do. So we have a list of topics, and to your point of unsolicited, the topics are broad. So to give you an example, one topic is chemical technologies, for example. Another topic is artificial intelligence. These are very broad, and they cover, I think, a lot of ground. But if none of those fit, and you can go to our website and you can see them, if none of them fit, we do have something called other topics. And so if you feel like it doesn't fit, I'll give you a Cliff Notes here, a little inside tip. Everything fits in one of the other topics. But if other topics is a good start, if you're worried where it fits, put it in other topics, and we'll find out that it will eventually fit another topic. And so we don't reject any proposals ever for topics.
Next question, how extensive does your team need to be? Is there a minimum number of team members?
Our median phase one awardee has 2 employees. So that indicates, at least at the start of the project, it can be a pretty small team. Some of those folks could be outside your company, but we usually want to see a fairly significant percentage of the work done inside the company. There's actually rules about that, but also if the company doesn't have any of the work being done, then the question is, why are we funding the company, right? So we want to fund the entity where that kind of owns the technology and has some core expertise relevant to it. And so, yeah, at the beginning, you could be a single person. The more important thing is less what you have at the beginning versus the the nature of the founders. In our experience, companies that don't have some small team of fully dedicated founders who also hold the reins of the company are at a gigantic disadvantage. And so if the person who owns your company is doing that as a side gig, that will be a problem typically. So what we want to see is that the team, at least such as it is, that's going to be putting in the hours is in the boat and is steering the boat, and the boat is not being steered by somebody who's not in the boat, if that makes sense. So that's really focused on the commercial kind of commercial best practices of what we're looking for. But as far as the research goes, whatever team you can pull together that you think is appropriate to the kind of scale of research, which is again about $250,000 over 6 to 12 months, is fine with us.
Thank you, Ben. And in your presentation, you did discuss ICOR, and I noticed Dan Gisser from the Ohio Aerospace Institute, another one of our sponsors today, brought up ICOR here locally. And I was wondering if either you, Ben, or you, Dan, might want to talk about ICOR and explain what it is and talk about what's available here locally in the Ohio market.
Go ahead, Dan.
Who's talking? Do you want to do it, Ben?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So the ICOR program is a program to begin learning about who your customers might be. And it's very, very early market research, typically designed to get people, often technologists, out talking to the folks who might eventually be their customers, their partners, their suppliers, everybody in their ecosystem. Try to figure out where is there a customer need, or where will there be a customer need, and how might their technology be crafted to eventually fit that need. The basic concept of it is go interview a whole bunch of people. And that can sound very formal, and sometimes it is, but it can also be a 5 or 10 minute phone call with someone and just talking to them. But to try to figure out where might the space for your project be eventually. We have a couple of very good ICOR programs here in Ohio. They're actually connected to each other, and they're funded by Ben's team at National Science Foundation. I'm not sure if it's exactly your team, Ben, but
not my team.
But
I don't have a team.
You don't have a team. But it's by your colleagues. How about
by
that?
my colleagues?
National
That's right.
Science
That's what we call them,
Foundation.
colleagues. Yeah,
So, there's programs both at the University of Akron and at the University of Toledo, and they work very closely together. And it's actually part of a much broader collaboration out of the University of Michigan and with several of the Big Ten kind of schools in the Midwest and the Great Lakes region. Get in touch with me afterwards, and I can connect you to any of those folks. I've got my contact information in the chat.
And I'll be sending out information on OAI to all the attendees today too, so they'll have that as well, Ben.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks.
Another question.
Let me also, sorry, Karen, let me just also say one more
Go
thing,
ahead.
just relative to Dan's comments. We actually allow all of our phase 1 awardees, we take them through a condensed version of ICOR. So whether or not you've done it before, we're going to take you through a version of it again, because we think it's so critical. And so that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it now, but we feel like that is the single biggest failure mode for our companies. And the reason why the person who created ICOR, who was an SBIR program director, created it to stop us investing in companies with SBIR funding who then failed because they didn't understand their market. So we think it's a great way to avoid the shoals you may run into.
And we have a related question that followed up. Are individuals, companies who have completed ICOR program and are in process of defining launching an MVP eligible?
Sure, absolutely. That's a very common. ICOR is a feeder for SBIR, right? There's a team right now connected to both Akron and Cleveland State, I believe, in my portfolio that went through the full ICOR as an academic team. It's called, they have a different name now, but they were a microbial corrosion detection platform for oil and gas. And they went through the full ICOR, and now they're a phase 1 SBIR awardee as well. And they have former grad students, current grad students, and faculty members involved who all went through ICOR together. So that's a very common path that a lot of our teams go through.
Next question. When talking about R&D project, do you also include the computer application involved in today's new technology using AI?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have very, very successful portfolio in the software space, and cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Quantum computing is obviously both hardware and software. some of the headlines I put up here, if I go back on my slides, you will see are actually specifically for software companies. So BitSite, the top right, the BitSite is actually a cybersecurity platform. And Open Space, which is about towards the bottom, that's a AI for a construction technology company. So we have about a quarter of our portfolio in software innovations. The important thing to know about software is that it's really important in that field especially to be able to understand if you have the level of innovation required. A lot of software, if you can conceive it, you can build it, and there's not as much risk involved. But there are some parts of software where you're at the cutting edge of AI or machine learning or computer vision or something like that, and you're not even sure with good software engineers whether you can pull off the technology you need to pull off. That's the kind of company we fund. But there's obviously a lot of software companies out there that may be great companies, but that are not a good fit for us because the software engineering side of things is relatively straightforward, right? Maybe there could be a lot of risk in the business model. We need to see risk in the technology as well. And so the project pitch is especially important for software companies because many of them are not a good fit for us because the level of risk is not high enough.
Can you please remind me available resources for market research, including books and websites?
Yeah, let me see if there's a website. I think that all the isn't all the ICorps videos, are they public? Dan, do you know?
Gee, I'm not sure actually. I think a lot of them are.
Yeah. So I know that so the guy who kind of really put all this together for the first is a guy named Steve Blank. He has a lot of stuff on his website for free, I think. He taught a class called the Lean Launchpad at Stanford that I think also a lot of that is online. So the book I would recommend, the one is by Steve Blank. It's called The Startup Owner's Manual. Oh yeah, there's one, and is that the Osterwalder book? Yeah. I can try to send those along. I don't know if you'll have a way to send follow-up information, but basically the customer discovery is the term you want to Google, and if you Google Steve Blank, the other thing you can do is that there's a tool called the Business Model Canvas. If you Google that, you'll probably get a lot of open source, but the guy who wrote the Business Model Canvas is a guy named Alex Osterwalder. You have to figure out the spelling. I think it's Osterwalder, but
yes.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, so those are two I think good books, but you can also find YouTube, free resources if you don't want to buy a book. That will get you most of the way, I think.
And
if you get in touch with me afterwards, I can point you to a bunch of those resources as well.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
And if there are resources you'd like me to mail out to the attendees today, just go ahead and forward them to me and I'll send them out to all the attendees.
The other thing you could do is if you go to nsf.gov/i-core, I'll throw that in the chat. That doesn't have links to specific resources, but there's a lot of links embedded in that you can follow to get down this rabbit hole if you're interested. I'll put that in here.
Thank you, Ben. Next question. If we are looking at licensing a series of patents from the US government and taking the technology concept from the lab to the field, would this fit the possible funding model?
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't matter where the technology comes from necessarily. And you don't actually have to have fully locked down exclusive rights to the technology. A lot of our companies are applying where there's still university licenses or other licenses to obtain. So that's fine. Obviously, as time goes on, we want to see you kind of get more strength around, the IP can oftentimes be the big barrier to entry for competitors. So eventually, usually want to see that you kind of have the access to the IP that you need. But yeah, whether the IP comes from the university or the government or somebody in their garage messing around with something, we don't have any preference.
And then putting that ICorps link is going to answer. Somebody was asking for a link to that.
Yeah, I just threw it in there. So the ICorps program is usually for university-based teams, but I think you'll find it's all the same. It's based on the same philosophy that you can use without being part of university.
And the last question I see in the chat before we turn this over to OAI and then more questions is saying, are previously submitted project pitches and proposals publicly available to view?
That's a great question. That's probably the biggest question we get. And the answer is no. We don't make anything you submit to NSF public. It's proprietary. It's kept confidential, obviously. We could create an example of a successful version of either of those documents, but we choose not to. And the reason we choose not to is because I think you've gotten the sense of this. We are really trying to give flexibility back to you. Really trying not to put our finger on any scale we don't have to, because our view from this, from having done this for a few decades, is that the more the government has a point of view, the less we're like dousing the specialness around startups, which is that some small group of people has a passion to do something that's important to them, and we want to get behind that. We don't want them to get behind us. We don't have as many good ideas as you guys do, so we want to get behind your ideas and support them. And the more we give you a textbook, like a cookie cutter approach to follow, the more you're going to be tempted to stray from what's in your heart. Let's put it that way. But I will say, I understand the urge to try to see what these look like. Project pitches, you're never going to know if somebody had a project pitch approved. That's not something that becomes public. And so you're going to have to be a little more enterprising to figure out if you can find somebody who's done that. But we have invited over 10,000 of them. So there's a lot of people out there who've gotten a pitch invited. The proposal themselves, if you get a phase 1 award, there is a public non-proprietary summary of that award. So every company we funded, contact information and a summary of what the company is working on is available on our website. And obviously all of those people have submitted successful phase 1 proposals. So there's 3,000 of those over the last decade. And I would encourage you to use that public information and try to see if someone will give you their proposal who's been through the program. In my experience, entrepreneurs are incredibly willing to help other entrepreneurs. And I did this when I was an awardee of the program. Someone gave me their proposal before I started. I gave my proposal after I was funded to other people. And I will also say, just on that topic of sharing your proposal, I know that a lot of people are very paranoid about their information and their technology. And I understand that, but I've never seen a company's information, any company try to steal any other company's idea, honestly. And I've worked with 2,000 companies here. So I understand trying to keep your proposal under wraps, but I would also encourage you all to fight that paranoia a little bit. And when in doubt, share what you're doing and share, if you're willing, these documents, because it does help other people. And I really don't think anyone has enough time to steal your idea in most cases. They've got their own stuff going on. So.
Thank you, Ben. If you want to stop sharing, I'm going to want to turn it over to earlier here to our next presenter. And it's represented Mr. Dan Gisser from the Ohio Aerospace Institute. They are a phenomenal resource here in Northeast Ohio for people pursuing SBIR, STTR programs. Dan, take it away.
Very good. And are you now seeing my slide?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben. That was really very helpful. I want to talk just a minute about the broader picture besides the National Science Foundation, and then a little bit about how we at OAI can help in addition to Vanessa and Karen at the SBA and the Ohio PTAC. Ben has been talking about the National Science Foundation's SBIR program, and you've alluded to several times that you're just one of several of the SBIR and STTR programs, all under the administration at some level of the SBA. And so I've got here the logos of the other 10. The larger ones, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, or NIH, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, and NASA, and then several smaller ones, the USDA, Homeland Security, Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, and the EPA. All of these have SBIR programs. They're all similar. They're guided by the same general law, but they all have different personalities. And some of those things that Ben was talking about what makes a good fit for the NSF are a little bit different for some of the other personalities. So the NSF, they're, as Ben has told me in the past, their middle name is science, and they're, in the end, funding things that are scientific. Other departments might be funding things that are a little bit further along and more developed. The Department of Defense is often in that case, but you're still doing research and technology development. The Department of Defense's interest primarily is to eventually be one of your large customers. They have a mission. and they need lots of widgets and lots of tools to be able to meet that mission in the future. So they're looking to fund technologies that will eventually help them do that mission. Similarly, for some of the other agencies like the Department of Transportation or the EPA or NASA, but others are more open and have more open topics, sort of similar to the National Science Foundation. So that there's different personalities that way. One of the questions in the chat came out about the Department of Defense and issuing narrow topics, which is generally right, because that's what they're looking for. Second piece is just about Ohio, and my numbers are a little bit older, and Ben probably has some of these a little bit different, but overall across the country, there's about $3.5 billion in SBIR awards every year, and Ohio does really quite well. We have about 220 SBIR and STTR grants from all agencies to Ohio companies. It's about 100 different companies, so clearly some companies get more than one. And it brings about $100 million of funding into the state of Ohio. So we do very well. We're typically in the top number 8 or 9 or 10 in states that do the most of this. And Ben, I don't know if you know our flag, but that's it with a nice pennant. We heard a little bit at the beginning of this from Karen and Vanessa about how the Ohio PTAC and the SBA can help out. At Ohio Aerospace Institute, my colleague Anthony Gillespie, who's got his screen on, and I work as well. And we work with companies across all technologies and who are looking at all of the different SBIR programs. And from when they're very unaware, and that's really what we're after here, just starting to learn about what these programs are, to helping you consider applying. Are you a good fit? Maybe you're not a great fit for the NSF, but you're a great fit for Health and Human Services. We can help you think that way through. We can help you consider where you might want to apply and finding a good topic for you. Starting to put together an application. We're not going to write it for you, but we're happy to review with you or strategize with you. If you're thinking about putting together a project pitch for Ben and his team at the NSF, happy to look at that before you submit it. I do it all the time. Once you do get a proposal approved, usually contracting is pretty straightforward, but we can help you with that. Karen can also help you tremendously with that. And then once you're doing the work, we can continue and like to continue working with you. Maybe it's helping you find partners to work with, helping you find industry connections or other government connections, helping prepare for your phase 2 proposal down the line, or other kinds of government or non-government funding that might come together. We're very well connected with the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Ohio and can point towards lots of help. We are especially interested in helping underrepresented minority and women entrepreneurs, and are always looking for referrals to them, but we will also help anyone in Ohio. Our services are paid by your tax dollars. You've already paid. And that comes through the federal government, through the SBA, as well as through the state of Ohio taxes as well. And so in the end, our services are just about always free to you for this kind of work. And I think that's all I'm going to say. I'll have our contact information here for Anthony and me. And I know mine is already in the chat as well. So thank you. And if there's more questions, we can try to answer them.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Ben? This is your chance. For Anthony or Dan or Vanessa or I. Again, you can go ahead and take yourself off mute, or if you prefer, you can put them in the chat. I'm not seeing any new questions here. I guess everybody was so thorough.
One comment, Karen, just while folks may be thinking of formulating questions here. There was a discussion earlier regarding the project pitch and finding examples. One of the things that Dan and I have discovered, just as far as companies that are going through the process, is that the program directors, Ben is probably being modest about it, but they're good at giving feedback. In a lot of cases, it's not necessarily always you submit and either you're accepted or not. So if there's some potential there, you will get feedback in a lot of cases to, provide more information before a final decision is made. So that's one way that they mitigate some of the circumstances around your submission and help you as far as, providing a project pitch where they can fairly, judge whether or not it would be accepted or not. So that's one thing just to keep in mind. But there are also resources such as, our team, others that can help you as far as through the process. So I encourage you to reach out to potential networks for support if you're unsure. And then the last piece that we say with companies a lot of times is there are basic, directions. There's a solicitation where they spell out what they're seeking as far as the project pitch. And so I would say as far as, the first time, read through that. And that's really your template to help guide you as far as what they're looking for. We can kind of help you translate if there's any questions along those lines or point you to the right party as well. So I'll pause there, but I just kind of wanted to lay that out there earlier because that was one question that came up.
Thank you, Anthony.
And one more plug about the project pitches. I think Ben said that the turnaround time is average around 2 weeks for getting some feedback from the project pitches. And I often, just to put Ben on the spot, I often see it quite a bit faster than that. The record I've seen most recently was in 9 hours. One got approved overnight. So, but it's often very, very fast.
Okay, a new question came up in the chat. Is Ohio Aerospace Institute part of NSF?
No, Ohio Aerospace Institute is its own nonprofit institution. We have about 25, 30 employees, something like that. We've been around for 30 odd years. And part of what we do, I didn't bring a slide about us overall, but part of what we do is support the aerospace industry across Ohio. But in addition, and sort of as a piece of that, we also are part of the entrepreneurial support community in Northeast Ohio and Ohio overall. And so this work is part of that. And again, it's across all industries.
Okay, a new question. If we miss one-year deadline submission after award of pitch, can we resubmit the same pitch?
Yeah, that's fine.
Easy answer.
Easy answer.
And Dan, I don't know if you want to stop sharing, and I just encourage anybody else, if they do have a question, they can take themselves off of mute, put yourself on camera so we can see you and talk to you about anything. Here's your chance. And there doesn't seem to be anything. All right. Well, I guess we can probably call this a webinar. Ben, thank you again for all of your information on the National Science Foundation. Vanessa, thank you very much for your continued partnership and support of PTAC and Ohio Aerospace Institute and the SBIR STTR program. And Dan and Anthony, I know you know it goes without saying for me how much I appreciate your support and partnership in helping our technological entrepreneurs in our ecosystem here in Ohio. And someone asked about Ben putting his contact info. I'll be sending that up also, if that's okay, and how Ben's information here when I send out his PowerPoint presentation to everybody. And then you'll have it also in the recording once it becomes available. Again, I did record this. We're going to be posting it on the Ohio University website. It takes a little while for it to get there, but it will get there. And
my email is in chat as well, so feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. And again, thank you, Vanessa, Ben, Dan, Anthony, as always. It is always a pleasure to work with all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Karen.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.